Hey, Alo, we're going to go live any second now. Who do you want to do a shout out to?
I'll do a shout out to my clients. I really appreciate being able to work with all of them, and I makes the job worth it.
Awesome. All of Alo's clients. Here we go. We have another absolutely awesome and amazing and special guest. We're talking with Alo Johnston. Alo is a trans man and licensed marriage and family therapist. He graduated with a master's degree in clinical psychology from Antioch University, Los Angeles, where he received specific unique training in LGBTQ affirmative psychotherapy. He continued his training at the Los Angeles LGBT Center and completed his training with the Los Angeles Gender Center. He now works in private practice in downtown Los Angeles. Welcome to the show, Alo. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Thank you for having me.
So we have to start with like all the cool, fun questions that other people don't get to ask because they don't either know
Totally.
trans people or they don't know that they know transgender people. So
Yeah,
um,
that seems like the big one. You might probably do. You just don't know that you know.
you probably do. It's like it's in the closet. Okay, you know what? Let's start with simple, and we're going to get more complicated as we go.
Sounds good.
Um, a lot of people get just the term. There's transgender, trans man, trans woman.
Mm.
Okay, trans man is a. You explain it. I don't need to. Trans man is.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day, you probably hear FTM and MTF a lot, which was female to male, male to female. So trans man is female to male, and trans woman male to female. A lot of people obviously don't like FTM and MTF anymore because it sort of centers the gender you were assigned rather than the one you identify with. So I'm a trans man. I'm presenting as a man. The word man is the important part in there, and that's how I want
Yes.
to be identified. A trans woman is wanting to identify with the word trans woman. And, then obviously there are lots of other terms. And I think the other big sort of umbrella term is non binary, which is just
Gotcha.
the binary of man and woman. The two options are not what someone identifies with, and they want to identify outside of those two.
Cool. And let's get the other basic terms out of the way so that everyone knows when we start using them in the conversation here today what we're talking about. That would be uh, gender and sex. What are the
Mhm.
two differences?
Yeah. Sex usually is the biological piece. And obviously, the way we talk about sex, when you're born, the doctor usually announces it's a boy, it's a girl. And that's usually based on an external view of sex. So, your genitals. They're looking at your genitals and determining your sex. But sex is made up of genitals, hormones. Um, it is, these various pieces, including, primary sex. And then these sort of secondary sex characteristics. So sex is made up of a lot of biological pieces, and then gender is sort of taking the sex piece and adding your social engagement, your um, just various like how you identify internally, and that can be psychological, that can be cultural, that can be all these other elements that are sort of the way we relate to the world, the way we interact with other people, and how that is, you know, sort of there.
Exactly. Now, so at some point, people actually decide in their minds, like, everyone's calling me a woman, but I don't feel that way. People are calling me a man. I don't feel that way.
Yeah.
When does that happen, and how does one deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. I think there are small children who, are like just starting to realize, like, oh, everyone's calling me a girl. I don't feel like a girl. That can happen really young when people start talking. Um, and I think people have a sense of their gender identity really young sometimes. That can be, again, like preschool age. A lot of
Okay.
people do start to realize that they're trans, or have a different gender experience than other people during puberty, because at least for me, that was a time then a lot of dysphoria was coming up, a lot of like unease with my body starting to, progress, and a lot of people being like, "You're becoming a woman," and I was like, "I absolutely do not want that." It seems horrible and a tragedy. And then I think a lot of times other people will come out in adulthood, 20s, 30s, 40s. There's no obviously upper age limit, but I think, depending on what people's life experience is, they can sort of discover this is not my experience isn't the same as other people's experience, and I think some of these feelings I'm having socially or physically are some discomfort with the way people are perceiving my gender.
Gotcha. Look, a lot of the times, now you are a therapist mostly for trans people, correct? And people, they will find you, and what are the things that you talk about? I want us to start going deeper into what sort of things need to happen in terms of your talking and getting people comfortable with being who they really are.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times it's interesting because a lot of times you hear people talk about the trans experience, and like people do it very, they talk about it as if people do it very suddenly. Out of the blue, someone comes out as trans, couldn't have seen it coming, which I don't think is usually accurate. I think for me, I spent many, many, many years being very depressed, and I had no idea why. And then in college, I started to notice that, when people would call me ma'am or like ladies, for whatever reason, a lot of people are using this sort of term around my friends of calling each other ladies. And I was like, that part feels uncomfortable. Maybe there's something about my gender here. So I think when I work with clients a lot, this is absolutely not something that they just started thinking about. Usually it's like, this has been in the back of my mind for years. I finally need to talk to someone. It's getting to the point where it feels like I can't just keep it in my own head. I need to like take some action because this feels like it's becoming too hard to live like this. So a lot of times I think it's, finally someone starting to say those things out loud, starting to have those conversations of, what would it be if I lived outwardly as a trans person? Because I think a lot of times, at least for me, and I think a lot of my clients and even friends, the initial response is maybe I'll just take this to my grave. Maybe I'm trans, but maybe I'll just never say it ever again.
Yeah. So, uh, what do your or did your friends think about you when you first came out as you don't think that you're female, you want to be male? How did they react to you?
I mean, I sort of had a slower. I came out initially as genderqueer, which is a term similar to non-binary. I think people used more a few years ago. That was just like I didn't know if I felt like a man or a woman at that time, but I knew that I was uncomfortable. The way people were perceiving me and talking about me. I knew I was uncomfortable with certain aspects of my body. So at that point, I sort of was like playing with these sort of non-binary presentations and ways people would talk about me. I was like, I'm going to cut my hair, I'm going to dress differently, I'm going to use the name Alo, like all of these things. So people sort of were transitioning with me, I think, and a lot.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a fly. I think it can be seen.
It can. I thought it was my eye at first, but
No,
no.
I know. I was like, am I going crazy? Um, and so it took me a while to realize that I did identify as a man and I wanted to transition fully. So I think people were along for that ride with me as well.
It hurts me that people, when you come out with something that big, some people I know have had friends say, I'm no longer your friend.
Yeah,
And I don't understand that. And I guess they weren't your friends in the first place anyway, then. Is that right or wrong? What is it?
yeah. It is hard, but it does feel like it was interesting because I had these points of grief of losing friends and having these complicated conflicts with family members and things like that. That I was like, oh, life could have been easier if I never came out as trans. And then a part of me was like, no, I just wouldn't have known that people were like this if I never came out. Like they didn't suddenly become this way because I transitioned. They had that within them and I gave them an opportunity to show that part of themselves. And that's painful when it's not what I expected.
Right.
But yeah, it did feel like if these are people who can't handle my authentic self, then I mean, obviously that friendship was very superficial in the first place.
It is. So there's people out there who are going like, I would never be that way. I want to help support my friends. I want to actually be inclusive of everybody.
Mhm.
And but I also think there are a lot of people who are afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
You know, how can people support people who are trans and ask the questions that need to be asked?
Yeah, I always suggest people do obviously some level of research. Like you don't want to go to your trans friend and ask about like all things trans because again, they got plenty to deal with. It's already a lot. They probably can't give you the entire history and science and whatever else about the trans experience. So, I think doing some level of research before you start talking to someone. But of course, no book is going to tell you your friend's personal experience. No book is going to tell you what your friend wants to do, and like how they want to be referred to and all of those things. So I think a lot of times, doing that preliminary research, telling them, hey, I've been doing some reading or I've been, watching these YouTube videos or whatever. And I feel like I'm starting to learn more about the trans experience, but I wanted to ask you some things about your experience and like, what do you need from me? And I think that show of faith of just like, I'm doing what I can on my end. And also, obviously, I need some information from you to support you. I think that is huge and is very much appreciated.
Yeah. In general, what can people do to help? I am learning, and I have learned quite a bit, that things like health care are super hard to get. Things like mental health care are hard to get.
Yeah.
Um, what do you do?
Yeah. I mean, I think healthcare is for sure a complication. Luckily, more and more insurances are covering healthcare for trans people, but it doesn't mean it's easy. So, I think you still, if you're friends with any trans person, you're probably going to see a GoFundMe or something for some sort of, even if it's not surgery costs, it's just being out of work for, a month or something to recover, all of those things. Like, I think if you have the ability to financially support your trans friends, that's super helpful. Can't, or, that's not an option for you. I think doing some advocacy on their behalf. I feel like as a trans person, especially when I was very early in transition, I was just exhausted. Again, dealing with all sorts of things, dealing with my new experience, dealing with, some people not understanding this, dealing with these family experiences, just so much going on at the same time that someone misgendering me, someone using the incorrect pronouns for me, that was painful, but I also felt like I so frequently didn't have the energy to address it. And I think standing, if I'm standing with a friend and someone says she about me and that person says, actually, it's he, like corrects this person on my behalf, that felt huge. That I was like, oh, thank God I don't have to do it. This person is helping me out. And I think having those conversations as an ally, if you have a trans friend and say, would you like me to correct people if they use the incorrect name for you or the incorrect pronouns for you? Like, would you like me to say something? I think a lot of people are going to say yes. Obviously, it depends on the circumstance. Some people uh, it's not safe to do so in their workplace or whatever. So that might depend on the setting. But I think having those conversations with your trans friends and saying, can I advocate for you in this way is a huge relief.
I think that is huge. I love just that, even that small little thing. It actually happened today in a meeting that I was participating in, and I
Yeah.
didn't know if I should do a correction or not. So I just let it go, but I'll have to
Yeah.
ask if that was a good thing I should have done or not done.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because you just never know when things are appropriate or not appropriate, right?
Totally. And it's not appropriate to ask usually in the moment, which I think is having those conversations privately, separately, where you don't have to be like in the middle of a conversation or like in the middle of a Starbucks where you're like, would you like me to correct this person? Like, that's not the right time. You want to know just generally, when I hang out with this friend, what do they want from me? What is helpful to
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. I'll do that next time I get a latte somewhere and say,
them? Yes.
um, so now that you are out all the time, people talk to you, they know that you are trans. When you go to new places, I don't, I guess that you do not actually say, "Oh, I'm trans." Did you just go and you present as male, correct?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, when I again like am in an experience where I'm at like the grocery store, I'm obviously not coming out to like the cashier.
Right.
It's not relevant. uh, but I am pretty publicly out. Like my handle on Instagram is the trans therapist. If you Google my name, you will find I'm trans like immediately. I'm not stealth being the term of like moving through the world as if I were a cis person, never talking about that, never bringing that up. In almost all of my personal relationships, people know I'm trans. If I know anyone for more than 10 minutes, people probably know I'm trans. It's those short interactions where I'm walking down the street. If I'm in a grocery store, obviously it's not relevant. Um, and that can be interesting because, yeah, there are certainly times where people perceive me as a cisgender, straight guy, and that has been weird after many decades of being perceived as a and that, yeah, it's just an interesting adjustment because I felt like I went from being incorrectly perceived as a woman, again, that made me really uncomfortable, to being in this in between place where people saw me as like a confusing gender person because I was in the midst of transition and people were like, are you a girl? Are you a boy? Are you a butch lesbian? Like, I can't tell what's going on. Are you a 12-year-old boy? Or are you a 25-year-old woman? Like, there was a lot happening, and I couldn't tell what was happening all the time. And I sort of got used to people being confused. And then I got to this stage where people, well, the vast majority of the time, see me as a man and are not thinking about my gender in the sort of day-to-day experiences.
I just wonder sometimes, does it give you a better perspective having been a woman and now you can see the abuses that go on with women and
Oh yeah.
sympathize better and actually talk to your guy friends and go like, dude, that is just not right and here's why?
Yeah, it's funny because I joked that I went from being an angry feminist to a furious feminist because suddenly people were just treating me so much better when I was being perceived of as male. People listen to my opinions without arguing with me. Like, if I talk about my political opinions, people are going to be like, you got to cite your sources or like whatever. They're just like, oh, yeah, interesting. Um, People don't talk over me. People stopped catcalling me on the street. I'm living in Los Angeles. Like, I used to get people, following me or talking to me late at night in ways that felt very unsafe. And, you know, now I feel like I could have my headphones on, like deep in my phone. No one's going to bother me at all. And I think that was a very jarring experience to sort of feel like I had this level of respect and sometimes authority that felt like I was like, I didn't magically become smarter over the last couple months. Like, you just see me physically differently, so you're treating me differently. And then also this level of safety. And yeah, I think there were a lot of times too that people wanted to include me in like male culture by making these very like misogynistic jokes, and I'm like, it's still not funny. Like, I don't know why you think I would think that's funny now.
Right. Years ago on Saturday Night Live, Eddie Murphy did a skit, I believe it was him, says it was called White Like Me. And he
Mm,
basically did a makeup so that he looked like he was white, went into banks for loans, things like,
yeah,
oh, you don't need to sign those papers, sir, that kind of thing.
yeah.
That's what made me think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a laugh so we don't cry situation. Like, that's still, all that stuff is still happening.
Wow. What's the biggest thing that you've noticed that what you've changed now and people say to you and you go like that's just not right.
I mean, some of it's very silly. Like, people like assume that I have like a team. Someone was like, oh, what's your team when they're watching football? And I was like, I don't care about football even a little bit. I don't know why you assume I care about football.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah, I don't either.
people just are like, oh, you're a guy. Let me try and engage with you about guy things. And I'm like, okay. And some of it I think is more serious that, again, like, I don't feel like I have to work nearly as hard to be heard or, to have my voice out there. And again, obviously some of that is nice, but it went from this jarring, like I felt like I was constantly shrinking myself, constantly like expecting to be talked over, constantly expected to have to prove the validity of what I was saying, to now just sort of being inherently taken more seriously. And that is
Wow.
nice for me, but also I wish everyone had that. Like, I wish all of my female friends could just sort of move through the world. And, obviously that sort of level of intersectionality when people are perceiving me as this, white guy, which
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, especially white
Yeah.
straight guy, that I'm like, some of that's right. Um, is, getting all of the privileges of all of those identities.
Yeah, I want to try that one day. I want to be the
Yeah.
straight white guy.
I mean, truly, this is where all the prizes are.
God. I have to ask you about this because I love this off of your website. You talk about becoming the expert of your own life, right?
Mhm.
And what does that mean when you say you want to become the expert of your own life?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times people go to therapy and sort of assumed that the therapist is the authority, and there's like a power dynamic, which is very uncomfortable sometimes. Because, of course, I went to graduate school and I know psychology and I know these theories and I know all of these things. I have a lot of theory, I have a lot of expertise in sort of how therapy works, but I don't have, if you were my client, I don't have expertise about your life. I'm not going to be like, you're wrong about that. And I think that just having that respect that someone knows their own life and their own experience better than anyone else possibly could.
Mhm.
And of course, I could meet you for 10 minutes and have opinions about you. Some of them might be right. Some of them might be wrong. Some of them might be things you very much know about yourself, and some of them might be things that you don't see as easily. And not to say that that's not valuable at all, but also, again, like that, my opinions about you, my perceptions of you are not more important than your own experience of yourself. And I think a lot of times when I'm working with people, especially people who are figuring out their gender, like my job is not to be like, this is your gender, deal with it. Like my job is to be like,
Uh-huh.
where are you at? What do you need? What would make your life more comfortable, less dysphoric, like less painful, all of those things, is to respect the fact that you know your own experience far better than I ever could.
Wow, I love that, and that's a process I guess people have to go through, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I always felt like I was an incredibly insightful person. And then I completely missed that I was trans for so many years. Like there was just a blind spot because I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know that trans men existed until I was in college. Like there were so many reasons I missed it. I think if someone, when I was 10 years old was like, do you know that you could be trans? Like you could be a boy. I think a lot would have changed. I don't know if that would have been for the better or not. Like I'm sure there would have been different pros and cons of that experience if I had come out younger. But the fact that I didn't even know sort of my life was possible until I was around 20 years old. Of course, that's going to have a drastic impact on me, and I missed a lot of things until
Right.
that.
I get, yeah. You didn't get to play t-ball on the boys team.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, that I would
There's,
see what like young boys were doing, and I was like, I want to be doing that. And some of it I was able to do, but a lot of it was just people being like, oh, you're a tomboy, and I was like, okay, if that's what it's called.
I wonder like what it must have been like before. I don't know how many years ago it would have been that before there was surgery options available, before there was therapy available. I, what was that like? Do you have any insight on that?
For just trans people in general.
Yeah, for trans people, before you could do surgery, before we had the minimal amount of inclusivity that we have now in the world.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, I think the first trans surgery in the US was done in the 50s. So surgery has existed for a long time. It just wasn't accessible for people, obviously. There were very few surgeons who were doing it, and you had to pay out of pocket because insurance wasn't covering it for, many decades.
Right.
So people were either having to have a lot of financial privilege and wealth in order to transition surgically, or, raise a ton of money or go into a ton of debt, and that is if you could find a surgeon. So I think a lot of people, and it's interesting because if you look at old research, almost all of it says that like there are way more trans women than there are trans men. And I think that's, and now you look at the research, it's pretty split. It's about 50-50. Like it's
Okay.
very close to the same. So there weren't actually way more trans women. There were trans men. Trans women were sort of more noticeable based on these cultural standards. Like, and I think a lot of those really um, offensive and dangerous, sort of like man in a dress type stereotypes that
Right.
trans women in danger meant that people either had to decide to, I'm going to present as male even though I don't feel male because that feels safe, or I'm going to present as female even though I don't have access to surgery or hormones that are going to make it, so that potentially people are going to see me more as a woman and I have greater safety. I think that's a very difficult decision. Um, and some people chose one and some people chose the other. Whereas I think for a lot of trans men, there is more space in our culture, I think, to be a tomboy, to be butch, to be,
Mhm.
this sort of more masculine presenting woman. Some people sort of just pass a little bit easier as male. And I think, you look at some historical figures and you'll hear those stories of like, it was not discovered that this person was actually female until the autopsy or whatever. Like people were living
Right.
as male. They were dressing as male. They were, becoming soldiers. They were going into these all male schools, like all of those things. Um, just, sort of Mulan experience, like desperately hoping to not be found out, which is its own danger. So I think there is just a lot of people were making really, really hard choices, and none of them were great. They all had their safety issues. They all had, this is
Yeah.
if someone discovers who you are, like what's going to happen? And I think that was just a hard thing
Right.
to.
I can't even imagine. I mean, coming out as Superman is one thing, but coming out as trans is like a completely different thing, you know? So
Totally, it's a
I
lot.
don't, I don't know. So just so we can make it clear for people who are not trans but have trans friends or might have trans friends,
Mm.
how can anyone help somebody going through the experience of becoming who they want to be more easier, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, this one seems almost silly, but honestly, it's huge. Is I think be excited for your trans friends. Like I think a lot of times someone tells their friends or family, "Hey, I'm thinking about going on hormones," or "I'm gonna come out and start using these pronouns." People are very serious. Like there's just not a lot of a script for what do you say when someone comes out as trans. Because I think we have a script a little bit of what do you say when your friend comes out as gay. Like there's the like, thank you for telling me, I really appreciate that. Like,
Right.
all those things. When people come out as trans, like people just do not know what to do. So I think match their energy, but also if they're telling you they're excited about it, like they want it to be a positive experience. And if you can mimic that it is a positive experience, like, hey, congratulations, that's so exciting. I'm so happy that you're doing this for yourself. I think people don't feel like they're allowed to respond that way, or they don't know that that is an option. And I think that's such a huge thing to have people be excited and supportive. And of course, some people really appreciate that friend who's like, "Hey, do you want to go clothes shopping with me so we can, get your new wardrobe?" Or like, "Can I?" Even, things like, when you're starting to go into the men's room for the first time, you're starting to go into the women's room for the first time. Would you like me to come with you if you feel uncomfortable? Like those sort of supportive. Can I stand by your side? Can I help you in any way that would make you feel safer while you're in this, again, this like huge physical transition, but also emotional transition and social transition, and just like every relationship you have in your life is changing. That it's nice to have someone who's just like, I'm here, I'm by your side, how can I support you? I'm going to do what I can and be there for you.
That is huge. I am going to have our production team take that little bit that you just said right there and blow it up into a public service announcement or something because
Yeah.
I like that. I really, really do. Thank you for that.
You're
So,
welcome.
Alo, thank you for being on the show. I want people to be able to get in touch with you, and they can find you on Instagram at the Trans Therapist, and
Yes.
they can also find you on your link tree and find everything about you. Link dot or link to dot e slash the Trans Therapist link tree. Okay. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I love just talking to you and learning from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
All right. See you in the future. Bye.
Bye.